I'd like to begin, as we have made a practice of in our government, by recognizing we're on the traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I want to thank the organizer of this event, Ben Rabideau, for his amazing work bringing together a lot of voices that I only otherwise tend to see on social media, particularly on Twitter in real life. It's amazing to be here with Mark and with Christine and so many excellent speakers that have put a lot of time and effort into this issue. He's asked me to come and speak about what is the scope of money laundering that we're aware of, how is it affecting the housing market, these kinds of things. I find it really helpful when speaking about this to really start at the beginning of where I started on this issue, which was after being shortly after being appointed as Attorney General. And for those of you that haven't had an opportunity to work in government, it's a very interesting place. So when you're elected and appointed to a cabinet role, public servants come in and they brief you on the different issues that you're responsible for. The Premier assigned me the role, obviously, of Attorney General, but also ICBC, gambling policy in the province, liquor policy in the province, and so on. And most of the briefings were as you would expect. You know, here are the issues, 30, 60, 90 days, here are the big challenges coming up, and so on. One of them was not. One of them was quite different than I expected. It was a briefing from the Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch, which is the regulator for gaming in the province. And it was different from the beginning. One of the members of the public service said to me, "Get ready, I think we're about to blow your mind." The other briefings were certainly interesting, but they didn't blow my mind. But he was right, this one did. I can't share all of the details with you. There are still ongoing investigations and so on. But what I can do is give you a bit of a flavor of what this briefing looked like for me. They outlined for me that they believe that British Columbia was the center of a large transnational money laundering operation, and that in part it was operating through BC casinos. And to illustrate the point that they wanted to make to me, they showed me a number of videos. And so to replicate that for you, I'm going to show you some videos as well. These are not the videos I saw. These are videos from 2012. And I want to underline a couple things before I play the video for you. One is that this was a training video put together in 2012 for the regulator, and I'm not sure what the training effect was, because this activity continued right up until we banned the practice of taking bulk cash in casinos in December of last year. And also, the video that I'm about to show you had Pink Floyd's song Money playing underneath it. So just to give you a little bit of color about what you're about to see. So the man waiting on the sidewalk is out front of a BC casino, Lower Mainland Casino, and the man who just pulled up in the late model car has two plastic bags with him that are full of cash. They go into the restaurant next to the casino to try to avoid the security cameras, and obviously not especially successful, but to pass the bags from one guy to another. And after the cash is passed, the man who was waiting out front of the casino takes the bags into the casino, and the guy who dropped off the cash gets back in his car and drives away. So the guy in the car is a member of a criminal organization, and the guy out front is actually taking the money, and he's going to gamble with it. He bought the cash either through a loan sharking operation or in order to access money that he may have had in a currency-restricted jurisdiction like China or Iran. So you can see that there was a lot of cash in these bags. It followed him all the way through the casino. There's a top-down view of the cash cage. Each of those bundles is about $20,000, mostly 20s, some 50s. That's transaction one. Transaction two, same transaction happened out front of the casino or possibly in a washroom of the casino where there are no cameras. This is a top-down view of transaction two. You can see the cash, hopefully, stacking up there. This transaction, again, in excess of $200,000. This is the third transaction. I don't know how well you can see it, but they're using reusable shopping bags, which shows a real commitment to the environment. This is a very significant transaction, this one getting close to $500,000. This happened literally every day for 3 years, from 2012 to 2015, and then almost every day from 2015 till December of 2017. These are two bags. This transaction is probably about $1 million. One of the things that was interesting about this, and some of the video I saw was luggage full of money, is how heavy cash is. It's like helping a friend move books. But just the scope of the cash. So if you were stopped out front of the casino by police, odds are very good that they would seize the cash as proceeds of crime, but if you manage to get it inside the front door of the casino, this is the VIP cash room, where only VIPs, and this is a top-down view of that same transaction, where only VIPs get to go to have their cash counted. And then they would go up into the VIP gaming room. There were a lot of really interesting fades and transitions, like someone's home wedding video in the original as well. So we just cut it to show the transactions. So I tried a couple times to express how surprising it was to have this briefing and to have the regulator be so frank about what they thought was happening in our casinos. And the reason people were a bit skeptical about my surprise was I'd been the critic on the gaming file for a while, and we were getting these, through Freedom of Information requests, we were getting these reports about large cash transactions going through. And so I was asking questions about it in question period, and when I did that, I got invited to go and do a tour of Lower Mainland casinos by service providers who walked me through the casino to explain to me how it was impossible to launder money in BC casinos. And that was actually, it was next to impossible. They said there were certain ways maybe you could do a small transactions here and there, but you couldn't do large-scale money laundering in BC casinos, because if you brought that cash into the cash window and you tried to get a check, if you were successful in getting a check and you shouldn't have been able to, it would say not winnings, it clearly marked on the check. But ordinarily you should have all the same cash actually returned to you, was the policy. And one of the reasons why it was so challenging for people to believe that there was money laundering happening was that people were actually gambling and losing. They were buying chips with the cash, going upstairs, losing the money, and then leaving. So how is that possibly? It's the world's dumbest money laundering scheme. If you're bringing money into the casino and losing it, it doesn't complete the circle. And so while public officials were telling me as the critic on gambling and the opposition and to the media that it was basically impossible to launder money through BC casinos, on the other side of the world in Australia, a guy named John Langdale, a professor at Macquarie University, coined a term, the Vancouver model of money laundering. And he was educating international anti-money laundering professionals about how money was laundered in Vancouver casinos. The Vancouver model had a couple of really positive things going for it that allowed it to continue for as long as it did in BC casinos. The first is that government actually made money from it. Because people were bringing the money into the casino and losing, government gets a share of that, and we budgeted for a hit of about $30 million when we said no more bulk cash into BC casinos, based on a consultant report that was prepared for us on that. The second was, it was really difficult for people to understand initially, I guess, giving them the benefit of the doubt, what was going on. Because, as I said, if someone was losing the money, how could they be laundering the money? The money laundering was taking place at the doorstep of the casino. So for the people who told me that it was basically impossible to launder the money inside the casino, they were right. The laundering was happening at the doorstep. The person who met the car that you saw in the video paid for that cash, most likely, from one bank account to another bank account in China. And the money never left China for him to pay for the cash. It went from his bank account to a bank account controlled by the gang to pay for the cash. And then it was delivered personally to the doorstep of the casino for him by the person that was actually laundering the money, who had generated it through, allegedly, the proceeds of crime, and was now moving bulky and hard to manage cash into the casino, selling it, often for a service charge, and in exchange getting money not just into a bank account, but entirely out of Canada altogether. The reason why we know in some detail about what happened here is because of the work of a number of hardworking journalists, Sam Cooper, Kathy Tomlinson, and also Peter German, who we asked to go and do a review of what was happening in the casinos. He literally wrote the Canadian legal textbook on anti-money laundering law. He's a former senior RCMP officer and is very well qualified to do this work for us. One of the disturbing pieces, obviously, of Dr. German's work was that he turned up that these proceeds of crime were generated in significant part through the sales of fentanyl and carfentanil. You would have heard about this. These are the drugs closely associated with the overdose crisis that's particularly acute right now in Vancouver. The sale of this drug generating huge amounts of cash that needed to be laundered. And then also disturbing to many people who have faced challenges in the housing market, to say the least, was that when folks walked this cash into the casino, they had to fill out anti-money laundering forms. They filled out these very detailed forms, their names, their addresses, their occupations, and so on. Under occupation, the vast majority of people walking this bulk cash in listed their occupations as real estate related. It invited the obvious question, if they're walking bulk cash into the casino for fun, to gamble, are they also taking criminal cash into the real estate market and facilitating money laundering there as well? Before I bring you up to date on our work on the real estate issue, I'll give you a little bit more context about the scale of the transactions in the casinos. There were $20 million in suspicious cash transactions at the peak in July of 2015 in 1 month. The average after that peak was about $3 to $5 million in suspicious cash transactions per month. And for the last month for which we have data, after we banned bulk cash from casinos, the total was just $200,000. So we reduced it 100 times from the peak by simply saying, don't accept this cash anymore. I'm proud of the steps that our government has taken to address this issue, but we are a long way from solving this issue, and there are some pretty serious disappointments that have happened that give you some idea about the scale of the problem that we face. On November 29th, I found out through media reports that a prosecution against an alleged criminal operation called Silver International was stayed. This prosecution was supposed to be starting in 2 weeks, and it didn't start. Unfortunately, it was stayed. And there was speculation in the media about a number of reasons why it might have been stayed. There's been no public report yet from the RCMP or the federal prosecutors about why it was stayed. But it was expected that that was going to be Canada's largest anti-money laundering prosecution in history. So to have that case collapse on the eve of trial was a very significant issue in terms of public confidence in the justice system, that it didn't even go to trial. That case is currently involved in a civil forfeiture proceeding with the provincial government, so I can't talk about it too much because it's currently in front of the courts, but the pleadings are available online if you're interested in reading some of the details there. In another remarkable development at about the same time, Sam Cooper broke the story through Global News that the RCMP had done an intelligence report about real estate on the west side of the city of Vancouver. In a single year, they estimated as much as $1 billion in real estate transactions were tainted by the proceeds of crime. And for reasons completely unknown to me, the RCMP refused to release this report, although we've confirmed its existence, to Peter German, who is doing this real estate review. They said that they would not release it, and we offered all kinds of confidentiality assurances, but they refused to release it. So we're left with Mr. Cooper's reporting on the report, and the focus of the report was really exclusively on the Vancouver luxury housing segment, and then again, only Vancouver and only 1 year. About 2 years ago, Transparency International Canada did a study of nominee owners or ownership of residential property in Vancouver. They looked at the most expensive real estate in Vancouver, residential real estate, and they found almost 50% of the most expensive homes in Vancouver were owned through nominee owners, numbered companies, offshore trusts, or students and housewives. These are not typically professions that result in the kind of high income that allows the purchase of a $30, $40, or $50 million home. And their conclusion from that was that Vancouver had a beneficial ownership problem, that we didn't actually know who owned real estate. Some of the most challenging ones, obviously, are numbered companies, or companies where the sole director is a lawyer, where solicitor-client privilege protects from knowing who the actual property owner is, or offshore trusts or companies owning property with no clue of who the beneficial owner is. Another report then, again, Sam Cooper, revealed that the federal government had, in fact, reported to an international anti-money laundering watchdog that a criminal operation in Metro Vancouver had laundered $1 billion through the BC economy in a single year. Keep in mind, this is a completely separate $1 billion from the other RCMP intelligence report in real estate that I was just telling you about. When you read it, and it's publicly available, there's an international oversight body that watches over different countries' anti-money laundering efforts and rates them and says how well you're doing. This is the same one that regularly says Canada is not doing a great job on anti-money laundering. And there's quite a detailed narrative about what appears to be, but may or may not be, the Silver International case again. And the data provided to them probably, although we don't know for sure, coming from the RCMP. So These developments obviously feed into each other and have created a great deal of public concern about the scope of the problem in the real estate market, the connection to the overdose crisis, and so on, and have fed calls for a public inquiry. And I certainly understand why. I mean, excuse me. It's been a year and a half that I've been pushing on this issue. I've done presentations to all party federal committees. I've done multiple meetings with the federal minister responsible, Bill Blair. I've done meetings with police. I've done meetings with FinTrack, the anti-money laundering organization. I've done advocacy in front of the cameras. I've done advocacy behind closed doors, and it has been incredibly challenging. Dr. German's second report recently revealed that there are 0 federal anti-money laundering police officers dedicated to the anti-money laundering file in British Columbia. There are more than 20 funded positions. The 5 police officers who are working, he advises us, are working on civil forfeiture exclusively, referring cases to civil forfeiture. The explanation for that, in part, was there are other police officers doing other investigations, RCMP officers. So for example, they're doing a gang investigation. There's a money laundering aspect to it. They'll be investigating the gang and the money laundering. So it's not like they're doing any, it's not like they're not doing any anti-money laundering investigations. They are doing some, but it has to be connected to some other crime. The dedicated anti-money laundering police officers that you might think of a room full of very serious people, accountants and experts following the money, look at this suspicious real estate transaction involving international groups, doesn't exist. We have an anti-money laundering group at the provincial level. They're focused on casinos, JIGIT, the Joint Integrated Casino Team, and they have dedicated resources to work on casinos. But amazingly, even if you had today a very disturbing transaction that was submitted as a suspicious transaction report to FinTrack, the anti-money laundering agency, there would be no dedicated federal police officers working on that. So, as I say, although we've managed to stop the bulk cash coming into casinos to a large degree, and we appointed Deloitte to go in and make sure that the casinos were actually following our instructions on this and meeting our expectations that any cash that did come in, that there were detailed audit trails back to a bank or a source of cash that was legitimate. Despite all of those things, obviously we're facing some pretty major problems. And so, as I say again, I do understand why the public wants more in terms of public inquiry and political accountability for what's been happening here. Now, as I say, we asked, or Dr. German identified that the majority of people bringing cash into casinos said their occupations were real estate related. So we sent him out to do a second report. He identified 3 issues for us: horse racing, luxury cars, and real estate. He's finished his report, and he will be releasing his report shortly. He was looking at links between real estate activity and money laundering in BC casinos, the folks who were bringing the cash into the casinos, what were their activities in the real estate market. He was looking at the use of lawyers' trust accounts that may conceal the source of money in the real estate market. He was looking at the use of builder's liens. This was an issue exposed by Kathy Tomlinson, where people would allow builder's liens to be registered against their property in exchange for cash. And he was also looking at luxury cars, because I understand that you can buy luxury cars for cash, and knowing what was happening in our casinos, it seemed like a worthwhile area to look at, and I can assure you, having looked at the report, that it was. Now, the reason why the report's not out yet is we do a vetting process where we go through and we look at identified and identifiable individuals, companies, and so on who are in the report. We give them an opportunity to respond to ensure that we're treating everybody fairly, and we also provide a copy of the report to the police so that we ensure that we don't step on any active investigations. We've also taken a number of very significant steps, both inside the casinos and outside, to begin to close the door. So I don't know if any of you here have ever found yourselves in a casino, but if you have, I suspect it wasn't Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. But that was when the regulator was present in BC casinos. So we've decided to have the regulator present at peak hours, evenings, and weekends, to assist service providers in ensuring that, that there's a quick response on any issues that come up. We are separating out the promotion side of gambling from the regulatory side. So the BC Lottery Corporation, that's involved in generating revenue for government, will no longer be responsible for anti-money laundering regulatory authority. It will all shift over to the regulator. A lot of you, I imagine, involved in finance know that when you mix regulation and profit generation in the same department or in the same government group, it is a recipe for disaster, and it was certainly a recipe for a problem in British Columbia. And we have 42 different recommendations, including a dedicated policing unit for casinos and so on, that we're implementing as well. But we also introduced, as I mentioned, we had a problem with knowing who actually owns real estate. The finance minister introduced a bill around beneficial ownership of properties where you have to actually declare who the owner of the property is. That bill's in front of the legislature right now, and we hope it'll pass before the end of the session. This will be a public registry available to everybody to see who actually owns residential property in our province. This is something that British Columbians want very much, and it will greatly assist police, tax authorities, and others in identifying the source of money in the real estate market, especially when it's linked up with the, when they're able to use the data from, for example, the speculator tax as well. The second piece that is very important is a beneficial ownership around corporations. Obviously, you can incorporate anywhere across Canada, including a federal company, and operate in British Columbia, so we can't get too far ahead of our neighbors, or we'll just shift to another jurisdiction to become the, the jurisdiction of choice where you can hold a company anonymously. But British Columbia is definitely leading in having a requirement of declaration of beneficial ownership of companies, a registry held at the office. That is the registered office for the company, of who the majority shareholder is, who the real person is, where it's a company, who owns that company, who the real person is. One of the big issues identified by regulators, tax authorities, and police is that BC companies involved in illegal activities, they've been unable to determine who the actual owners and operators of those companies are. So our hope is that this will assist them in that work as well. One of the other pieces that may be of interest in this room is empowering the Securities Commission a bit more and ensuring they have the resources to do a good job in our province. There was 25 years that they didn't increase their fees. They're a revenue neutral organization, and so they had limited resources to do the job that they were tasked to do in ensuring the appropriate operation of companies and various economic crimes that they are charged with investigating. So they have increased resources to do that. And we've also provided increased tools and are providing additional increased tools for them to enforce their judgments, because often people are running Ponzi schemes and these kinds of things. It becomes very difficult, if not impossible. There's been lots of high-profile media expressing concern about the fact that people who took senior savings and robbed them and are basically operating with impunity in British Columbia, and that needs to be fixed. So our goal is pretty simple, get the dirty money out of BC. It's not easy, obviously, but it's a worthwhile enterprise for our province, and I look forward to sharing a lot more information with you, especially with the second phase of Dr. German's reports as that comes out. I want to thank Ben again for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to my conversation with Mark in the real world. This is very serious.
We're in for it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna